The Arabian Nights, retold by Wafa, Tarnowska, and illustrated by Caroline Hernaff. We begin with when Shariar meets Shahrazad. Long ago, when tales traveled along the Silk Road from China to Persia, there lived two Persian kings. They were brothers, and each was handsome, brave, and loving. One ruled from the city of Sestipan in the west, and the other from Samarkand in the east, so neither saw the sun set at the same time as the other. The elder brother was called Shariar. The younger brother was called Shahzaman. Both brothers had married for love, not for money or status, and both were blissfully happy with their wives. They were also kept extremely busy year after year, dealing with affairs of state. However, not everything went well with the brothers' marriages. A time came when both of their wives betrayed them. Shahzaman was so saddened by this that he became a hermit and vowed never to come close to a woman again. As for Shariar, he was convinced that all women were treacherous. However, he also missed their laughter and their warmth, their embraces and their jokes, their wit and their grace. What should he do? Instead of seeking someone whom he could grow to trust and love over time, he came up with the dreadful notion of marrying a new bride every day, spending the evening and night with her, and in the morning having her put to death. A month passed, during which time Shariar had already married 30 women and put each one of them to death. He had wedded the daughters of princes and merchants, officers and commoners, each of them just for one night. In the morning, each young woman was beheaded. A whole year passed, and still no one could stop Shahriar's madness. The task of finding a new bride each night fell to his vizier. The vizier hated this distasteful task, but he knew he had no choice. He also knew that one day, one of his daughters would have to be presented to his cruel master. He was dreading that day because he had not one, but two lovely daughters. The elder was Shahrazad and the younger Dunyazad. Both daughters were as clever as they were beautiful, but of the many talents they each possessed, the most notable was Shahrazad's gift for telling stories. She loved telling them, reading them, collecting them, and translating them, for she could speak several languages. Her mind was like a treasure trove, and she was full of invention too, making each story more elaborate than the next. One day, Shahrazad suggested, "Let me marry the Shah." "Are you crazy?" the vizier exclaimed. "Who in their right mind would choose to marry him, knowing what lies in store?" "I have no intention of dying," Shahrazad replied. "Someone must put an end to this madness, and I believe I can do it." "I will not let you endanger your life," concluded the vizier. For many weeks he would not let his elder daughter raise the subject again. In the meantime, the city of Sestipan was in continuous mourning. Young women were getting scarce, and the army was becoming ruthless in its search for suitable brides. The vizier felt increasing pressure to lead by example. He could hear the courtiers whispering during council meetings about how their daughters were being led to the slaughter while the viziers were spared. Finally, the vizier decided to let Shahrazad have her way. He and his wife wept all day as their beloved daughter was dressed for the wedding. Even Shariar felt a tinge of remorse at marrying the child of a trusted vizier, so he was unusually kind to her. Hence he did not say no when she asked if her younger sister Dunyazad could join them at the end of the evening, so that she could tell a story before going to bed. "But there is a condition," he said. "I must be free to listen too." "What kind of story will it be?" "The kind of story that entertains children and adults, kings and queens, the rich and the poor. The kind of story your grandmother told you when you were a boy," Shahrazad answered sweetly. When Dunyazad entered the royal bedchamber, she bowed to Shariar, kissed her sister Shahrazad, and asked her in a low, sad voice, "Shahrazad, as this is your last night with us on this earth, Can you please tell me one of your best stories, so that I may remember you forever?" Dunyazad settled at her sister's feet, while Shariar stretched on his couch, putting his arms behind his head, and felt himself relaxing for the first time in a year. "Maybe this bride will prove different from all the others," he thought to himself, as Shahrazad started talking. What follows in this book is a collection of the stories she told, and we will read one of them, The Singing Tree. Once upon a time, in the land of Persia, Shahrazad was narrating now, there lived a Shah called Khazru. Now, this Shah liked to disguise himself as a pauper and wander the streets after dinner, eavesdropping on his subjects. He believed it to be the only way to discover what was going on in his kingdom. One evening, as Khazru was passing through a poor district of the city, he heard three sisters having a lively discussion. He stopped outside the closed shutters of a window and listened. "I wish I was married to the Shah's baker," said one voice. "I would have freshly baked bread every morning and invite my friends for tea and cakes every afternoon." "I wish I was married to the Shah's cook," said a second voice. "I would have delicious stews at lunchtime and invite my friends for sumptuous dinners." "I wish I was married to the Shah himself," said another voice, the sweetest of the three. "Then you could both come and live with me in the palace, and we would all dress in the nicest clothes and have wonderful parties." Khazru smiled indulgently at these words, then headed back to the palace. But that night he could not sleep. He kept on hearing that voice as sweet as a bulbul saying, "I wish I was married to the Shah." So the next morning he called his grand vizier and said, "Bring those three sisters to the palace immediately." The sisters were in all of a fluster when they arrived. They were even more astounded when the Shah said to them, "Do you remember what you were telling each other last night? Well, it is about to come true. You," he told the eldest sister, "will marry my chief baker. And you," he said to the second sister, "will marry my chief cook. And you, fair one," he told the youngest sister, "you shall marry the Shah." The wedding festivities happened that same night, 2 weddings in the servants' quarters, and the third one in the great hall. This made the older sisters immensely jealous. From that day on, they were determined to destroy their sister's marriage. Now the Shah was so in love with his young and lovely wife that nothing was good enough for her. He covered her with splendid jewels and silken robes, and he went everywhere with her until she fell pregnant with their first child. One day, while the Shah was out hunting, his wife gave birth to a beautiful little boy. Exhausted by the birth, she summoned her older sisters for help. But they did a very evil thing. They took the baby away, wrapped him in a blanket, placed him in a basket, and let it float down a river. When the queen awoke, she found a little puppy sleeping in her bed. "Look at what our queen has given birth to," said her sisters, pretending to be astonished. The Shah came back to find his wife in tears. "I must have married a jinn," he thought to himself. But he did not dismiss his young wife, as her sisters hoped. Soon she was heavily pregnant with their second child. This time she gave birth to another baby boy. Once again she called on her older sisters for help. And once again the older sisters took the baby away, wrapped him in a blanket, placed him in a basket, and let it float downriver. When the queen awoke this time, she found a little kitten sleeping next to her in bed. Khazru's mood turned dark. "My wife cannot be fully human," he thought. "But what can I do? I love her too much. I must give her one last chance." And so another year passed, and the queen gave birth to a little girl. This time, the evil sisters replaced the baby with a small lamp. Like her 2 brothers before her, the baby was placed in a basket and left to float downriver. "Enough is enough," said the angry Shah. "I am sending my wife to a farm, along with her cat, dog, and lamb, for that is exactly where she belongs." And so the poor queen was sent into exile. As for the Shah, he was too angry to consider looking for another wife. However, Allah in his infinite mercy had other plans. Each of the children was found by the head gardener, who lived at the far end of the palace grounds. He and his wife were childless, so they were overjoyed at the arrival of 3 beautiful babies. They called the first boy Farid, which means unique. The second boy they named Fuad, which means heart. And the baby girl they called Feroz, which means turquoise. The head gardener and his wife ensured that the children were brought up well and were given a fine education. When they grew old, the Shah, in appreciation of his long and excellent service, gave his former servant a country house with enough land to design his ideal garden. The head gardener turned his plot into a small paradise with gurgling fountains and exotic plants, shady trees and meandering paths. There the family spent some very precious days together. But all good things come to an end, and after a few years, the head gardener and his wife passed away. The children became even closer now. Farid and Faud took great care of Feroz, and she made it her task to look after her father's garden the way he would have wanted. One day, as Farid and Faud were out hunting, an old woman stopped by the house, asking for shade and water. Touched by her suffering, Feroz took her into the house, offered her refreshment, and invited her to rest under the boughs of her favorite cedar. When the old woman awoke from her sleep, she thanked Feroz and asked her for a tour of the garden. Feroz happily obliged, telling her guest all about the plants, the trees, the birds, and the fountains. The old woman did not utter a word, just nodding her head in response. "So, good woman," asked Feroz at last, "what do you think of my father's garden?" The old woman cleared her throat and said, "Well, my dear child, this is indeed one of the most beautiful gardens I have ever seen. However, if I may be frank, there are a few things missing from it." "Missing?" exclaimed Feroz. "What can be missing?" "Your garden will never be complete without 3 essential elements, my dear," replied the old woman. "What your garden truly needs is a speaking bird, a singing tree, and golden water." "And how will I find this bird and this tree and this water?" asked Feroz. "Anyone who follows the road from your house and rides for 20 days can find these marvelous items if, on the 20th day, they ask the first person they meet about them," said the old woman. And with these words, she took her leave of Feroz and went on her way. When Farid and Fuad returned that evening, Feroz was silent and preoccupied, quite unlike her usual talkative self. "Is something bothering you, dear Feroz?" asked her brothers. "There is," she answered, "but I would feel silly telling you." They only got the full story after much teasing and cajoling, and promising not to laugh at her too much. "I shall go and find the speaking bird and the singing tree for you tomorrow," declared Farid. "And in case you worry about me, here's my dagger. If any blood appears on it, you will know that I am in grave danger. If not, you may be sure that I am safe." Feroz secured the dagger in her belt in a silver sheath studded with precious stones. At dawn, Farid saddled his horse and galloped away, only stopping to sleep, eat, and pray. On the 20th day, he came across an old dervish sitting under a shady tree, with a large sack beside him. "Wise man, can you please tell me where I can find the speaking bird, the singing tree, and the golden water?" Farid inquired. "Are you aware of the dangers you will have to face to obtain these marvelous items?" the dervish asked. "I will face any difficulty to make my sister Feroz happy," replied Farid. "Then listen carefully," said the dervish, reaching into his sack and bringing out a round metal bowl. "Take this bowl and throw it in front of you. Let it roll until it stops. Ride your horse to where the bowl lands. Dismount from your horse and leave the bridle over its neck. As you go up the hill, you will see to right and left a great quantity of black stones. Don't stop. You will also hear voices making all kinds of unpleasant comments. Don't look behind you, or you will instantly be transformed into a black stone. If you reach the top of the mountain without looking back, you will see a cage with the bird you seek." "What about the singing tree and the golden water?" asked Farid. "Ask the speaking bird, and he will tell you where to find them," replied the old man. So Farid mounted his horse and threw the bowl as far as he could. The bull rolled for a long time until it stopped at the foot of a mountain scattered with black stones. He dismounted, left the bridle over the horse's neck, and began to climb. He had barely walked a few steps when the voices that the old dervish had warned him of began to whisper in his ear. "Where are you going, you fool? What do you want from this mountain?" Other voices shouted, "Stop, thief! Stop! Go back home! There is no speaking bird here." Other voices shouted, "Kill him! Catch him! Quarter him!" While other voices answered, "No, don't touch him! Leave him alone! Do not hurt him!" Ignoring all of these voices, Farid climbed up and up until the voices became so strong they gave him a headache. His hands started sweating and his knees trembling. "What's the matter with me?" he thought. "I am feeling so weak. I don't think I can carry on. I'd better turn back." But the moment he turned his head, he was transformed into a black stone. Down at the bottom of the mountain, his horse became a black stone as well. That evening, Feroz pulled a dagger out of its sheath and discovered it was covered in blood. She started sobbing inconsolably. Fuad ran to see what was the matter. At the sight of the bloody dagger, he put his arms around Feroz and tried to console her. "It's my fault," she cried. "I wish I had never listened to that old witch." "I know how much you want that bird," said Fuad, "so I shall fetch it for you and find out what has happened to our dear brother as well." "Please don't go, dear Fuad," Feroz begged. "I could not bear it if anything happened to you as well." But her brother won't be swayed. "Take my amber worry beads," said Fuad. "If they run smoothly, I am safe. If they stop moving, I am in grave danger." Feroz took the worry beads and wrapped them around her wrist. Then she kissed her brother goodbye and retired to her room to pray for his safe return. After 20 days of hard riding, Fuad met the same old dervish that Farid had met. "Peace be with you, wise one," he said. "Can you please tell me where I can find the speaking word, the singing tree, and the golden water?" "A young man who looked much like you asked me this question not so long ago," said the dervish. "It must have been my brother," said Fuad. "Poor young man," sighed the dervish. "He must now be one of those numerous stones scattered over that mountain." "And how does one reach that mountain?" asked Fuad. "I wish I did not know," said the dervish gloomily, "but the truth has to be told." He then took a round metal bowl from his sack and gave Fuad exactly the same instructions that he had given Farid. Fuad threw the bowl as far as he could. It rolled for a long time and stopped at the foot of the mountain, scattered with black stones. There Fuad dismounted, hugged his horse, and stood for a while, gathering his courage, determined that he would reach the top. He had barely walked a few steps, however, when the voice of a man shouted behind him, "Stop, thief! You're trespassing on my mountain." Without thinking, Fuad turned his head to speak to the man, but was instantly transformed into a black stone, together with his horse. Poor Feroz! When she ran the amber beads through her fingers that afternoon, they were stiff and heavy. She knew then that Fuad was in grave danger. This time, though, she did not waste time crying. Instead, she took some of her brother's clothes, disguised herself as a man, jumped on her favorite horse, and rode for 20 days to the place where the old dervish lived. Alighting from her horse, she asked the old man, "Good uncle, have you seen 2 handsome young men looking for the speaking bird and the singing tree?" "You must be the exceptional young woman they were trying to please," said the old dervish, smiling. "Nothing can disguise your beautiful voice. I beg you, good uncle, to help me find them. They came to me a while ago, and I gave them the same instructions that I will give you," said the old man, reaching into his sack. "Take this bowl and throw it as far as it goes, and when it stops, you must stop, leave your horse, and climb the mountain. The difficult part is to resist the voices that will shout at you from the mountain." "How can I resist them?" asked Feroz anxiously. "You must have a quiet mind and the eyes of a falcon fixed on its prey," the dervish answered, "and you must never look behind you or you will be transformed into a black stone." "I can be like a falcon," said Feroz. "I have gone hunting with my brothers many times, and I have observed these princely birds fixing their prey. But how do I quiet my mind?" "By ignoring the voices," replied the dervish. "I have an idea," said Feroz. "I will stuff my ears with scraps of cloth." "Splendid idea," said the dervish, smiling. "Remember the falcon," he went on. "Focus on your goal and don't look back." "Thank you," said Feroz, and she threw the bowl in front of her as far as it would roll. "Remember the falcon," she repeated to herself. Feroz then calmly climbed the mountain, looking neither left nor right, and not hearing the cacophony of the voices. She kept her gaze focused on the mountain top until she could see the cage with the speaking bird in it, as if from afar, for she still had the pieces of cloth in her ears. She heard the speaking bird say, "Stop, don't move, don't come any closer." But Feroz was determined to get a hold of that cage, so she ran the last few yards with her eyes fixed on that bird. "I've got you," she shouted, grabbing the handle. "Now you're mine." The moment Feroz took hold of the cage, the bird inside it started singing, so she took the pieces of cloth out of her ears to hear him. Feroz was enchanted, but she knew her work was not yet over. "Tell me where to find the singing tree," she said. "Turn around, and you will see a wood, with the singing tree right in the middle of it," said the bird. "You need only take a branch of the tree to plant in your garden." The moment Feroz entered the wood, she saw a magnificent tree, overshadowing the others. "I don't think I have ever heard such a beautiful tune," she thought to herself, as she listened to the exquisite tinkling of its leaves. Approaching the tree, she begged its pardon as she carefully broke off one of its lower branches. Returning the branch to the speaking bird, she said, "Now I need you please to tell me how to find the golden water." "That's simple," said the bird in his beautiful voice. "If you sit still for a while, you will hear the sound of a gurgling stream. Just follow the sound, and you will see the golden water." Following the bird's instructions, Feroz found the stream. The golden water was as bright as shooting stars on a summer night. "This is truly one of the most beautiful sights I have ever seen," said Feroz to herself as she filled a small flask she had brought with her. "I have one more task to accomplish," Feroz said when she had returned to the singing bird, "and that is to find my brothers. Sprinkle a drop of golden water over every black stone you encounter on your way down the hill," the bird advised, "and among them you will find your brothers." Feroz made her way down the hill, sprinkling a drop of golden water on every black stone she passed. Every black stone turned either into a human being or a horse. Soon, dozens of young men were stretching their limbs and yawning as if waking from a long sleep, and horses were neighing and shaking their manes and limbs. When Feroz finally reached the stones that were her brothers, transforming them with the magic water, all three of them wept tears of joy at being reunited. The three of them returned home and hung the cage of the speaking bird by a pergola covered with golden and purple grapes. They planted the branch of the singing tree in the middle of the garden, where it took root and grew to become the most beautiful tree of all. They then poured the golden water into one of the fountains, where it surged in beautiful glistening jets, splashing and sparkling by day and night. It looked as if they would all live happily ever after in their beautiful house and garden. The news of the garden with the speaking bird, the singing tree, and the golden water spread far and wide. Many people came to see the wonders with their own eyes. Feroz was graceful, a kind and patient hostess, who greatly enjoyed showing her father's garden to her many visitors. Seeing their sister so happily occupied in this way, Farid and Fuad returned to their favorite pastime, hunting. One day, as the brothers were riding in pursuit of a fox, they came across Shah Khosrow's hunting party. "May the blessings of Allah and His Prophet be upon you, Your Majesty," said the two brothers, dismounting and prostrating themselves before the Shah. "Who are you, young men?" asked Khosrow, strangely stirred by this encounter. "We are the sons of your late head gardener," replied Farid, "and it would please us enormously if you were to pay a visit to our father's garden." "Indeed," said the Shah, "I have heard fascinating stories about your garden. It would please me immensely to see it." "We could not have wished for a greater honor," said Fuad. "Would your Majesty care to honor us with his presence tomorrow?" When the Shah agreed, the brothers rushed to their sister to tell her the good news. "I wish Mother was here," said Feroz, with tears in her eyes. "I have no idea how to entertain a Shah." "Let's ask the speaking bird," suggested Farid. "Well, that's an excellent idea," replied Feroz, rushing to the garden. "Speaking bird, oh, speaking bird," she asked, "what does one offer a Shah?" And the bird replied, "Shahs like nothing better than eating baked cucumber, stuffed with fresh pearls on toasted bread and butter. You mean stuffed with rice, surely, said Feroz. No, I mean pearls, answered the speaking bird. The following day, a big fanfare announced the arrival of the Shah. Feroz and her brothers rushed to greet him. They led him to the garden and invited him to sit under the pergola while the speaking bird sang a tune of welcome. After taking some refreshment, the young people showed Khusrau the fountain, where the golden water tumbled and splashed. This is truly a wonderful sight, said the Shah. Then, turning to Feroz, he asked her to lead him to the singing tree. As she walked around, he could not help but admire her graceful demeanor, her elegant dress, and her delicate hands. It was a pity he could not see her face, for she had covered it with a veil, so only her eyes were visible. How lucky my head gardener was to have such wonderfully handsome and loving children, Khusrau thought to himself. Why did I have such bad luck to be given a cat, a puppy, and a lamb instead? Out loud, he inquired of Feroz, What age are you, my child? 16 years old, sire, she replied. That's the age my youngest child would have been, thought Khusrau. But his musings were interrupted by a melody so enchanting that he believed Feroz and her brothers must have hired an orchestra for his visit and hidden it in the garden. This is such beautiful music, he said to his young hostess. I must congratulate the musicians. The music is made by the singing tree, sire, explained Feroz. It changes with the time of day and the weather. The tune becomes sad when it is cold and happy when it is warm. The tree is quiet during the night and vivacious during the day. No tune is ever the same. How lucky you are to have such a garden, replied the Shah. You must count your blessings every day. Indeed we do, sire, replied Feroz. This music and walk have whetted my appetite, declared the Shah. Let's see if your cook can conjure up a meal as exquisite as the music of this tree. The meal was served under the pergola by the cage of the speaking bird. But you should have seen the Shah's face when he realized the cucumbers were stuffed with pearls. What is this? He cried angrily. Are you trying to poison me? Before the brothers and their sister could answer, the speaking bird piped up. Why is it such a surprise to see cucumbers stuffed with pearls? Didn't your majesty surmise when your wife gave birth to animals that she was somewhat diabolical? That is what her sisters told me, answered the Shah, visibly shaken. And why did you believe those old witches? Sang the bird. Because I saw the animals with my own eyes, answered the Shah. The eyes of the heart are the only eyes that truly see, said the bird. Then he added, Look around you and look afresh at your beautiful sons and daughter, blood of your blood and flesh of your flesh. Upon hearing these words, Khusrau's heart melted with joy. Was it possible that he was a father after all? When he looked at the smiling faces of Fuad and Farid, he saw with his heart's eyes and felt in his soul deeply that these were truly his children. He stood up to embrace his sons, then he gently lifted the veil from his daughter's face. She looked exactly like her mother. I have been such a fool, thought the Shah, to have believed those two witches. They have deprived me all these years of the joys of fatherhood. Then, turning to the speaking bird, he asked, Can you tell us the whole story? So the speaking bird told the Shah how the head gardener had found the 3 children as babies, each floating down the stream in a basket, how he had given them the best upbringing and education and taught them how to care for and love each other. Khusrau rose to embrace his children one more time and told them, Come, let us mount our horses and ride to the farm where your mother lives. I need to beg for her forgiveness and bring her back to the palace. Then we can be a proper family at long last. You should have seen the joyful tears that fell from the face of the exiled queen and the kisses she gave her long-lost children. You should have heard the sighs they all made at the wasted years and the cries of joy that greeted the royal family when they returned to the palace. You should have seen the rice that was thrown over them by the cheering onlookers and the rose petals carpeting the floor. You should have seen the faces of the 2 evil sisters when they were thrown into the dungeons, kicking and screaming and protesting their innocence. And you should have seen the magnificent new cage that was made for the speaking bird out of gold filigree studded with precious stones. It hung in the palace courtyard, shaded by trees whose leafy branches attracted all manner of birds, forming an exquisite choir that delighted everyone who heard it. And that is the end of this particular story. To see the rest of the stories and what becomes of Shahrazad and Shariar, I encourage you to read the rest of Arabian Nights.